Israel's attack on Iran and then the United States joining in the fight with its B-2 bombers and bunker busters, and followed by the Operation Sindoor, the fierce clash between India and Pakistan, almost the fifth India-Pakistan round of 96 hours. They've taken away the spotlight from the Russia-Ukraine war. But let's not forget, this fierce war of attrition has been grinding on for the last 3.5 years, and we don't seem to see the light at the end of the tunnel. As we are all aware, Donald Trump had very grandiosely promised that the day he would take charge, within 24 hours, he would stop the war in Russia-Ukraine, that bloodletting, as he said, horrible casualties, and also the war in the Middle East. But to the contrary, we find that in both places the war escalated. After a small pause in operation, Israel went out and destroyed the Hezbollah. Then it attacked Iran itself, right? And then America joined in that particular fight towards the end. But in a very token sort of a way, by trying to hit Fordow, Isfahan, and the one more nuclear facility that they had, uranium enrichment facility. America claimed it destroyed all these. Now the story is that not all has been destroyed. In any case, all this took away the limelight and attention from the Russia-Ukraine war. But that war is very much on. It has been continuing steadily. What are the Russians doing? What are the Russian aims? What is likely to happen in the next month or so? This is the summer season in Ukraine, which is the operational season, which is the season for launching major offensives, because the ground hardens and becomes solid, the snows have gone, melted, and the weather is better for launching concerted military operations. In the instant case, Russia, there were some reports of a reserve of 300,000 fresh troops that they had created, but the more realistic appraisal is that about 110,000 troops, this is the Ukrainian assessment, have been assembled by Russia in the Donetsk region. The province of Luhansk has been captured, more than 90% captured. They are fighting to grab the rest. Donetsk, there still is about 40% left. 60% is with them, but about 40% they still have to capture, and that involves very heavy and very fierce fighting. But it appears that the Russians are now assembling their troops towards this area, and their main attacks could come in the area of Pokrovsk, where there is the Russian combined arms army that has been attacking constantly towards Pokrovsk. The Ukrainians realize the criticality of Pokrovsk, and they have launched major counterattacks in this area to slow down and to some extent push back some of the gains that the Russians had made in this area. But the Russians are now planning to attack Pokrovsk from the northern flank, and that could, they have created pockets. And this, if they close the pocket from behind, well, that could give that Hobson's choice to Ukraine, either fight and die or withdraw. There are about 30,000 Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk. To the north of Pokrovsk is the second, Russian salient of Konstantinivka. Here there are about 50,000 Ukrainian troops. It is a massive, massive pocket castle slash, which is formed. 30,000 Pokrovsk and about 50,000 in Konstantinivka. They're also going to attack Konstantinivka, they're going to attack Pokrovsk, and as a kind of initial probing operations, they have attacked in Sumy, they have attacked in Kharkiv, they are coming to the Rhine of the Oskil river, they have attacked in the Kupiansk direction, they have attacked in Zaporizhzhia. So they are trying to press Ukrainian troops all over, so that they are drawn to these further areas and they open up avenues of attack for the Russians in the critical Donetsk sector. Previously, there were speculations that the Russians might attack and try and take Kyiv, number one, or they might attack and take Odessa. But it now seems that the Russians are going to focus on taking what is left of Donetsk. The 40% of Donetsk that is left, for which they have to capture Pokrovsk, they have to capture Konstantinivka, and then they have to break out towards Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. These are the last bastions left in Donetsk province, Donetsk Oblast. And beyond that, Russia will break out into Ukraine proper. So don't forget that the whole rebellion of the Russian-speaking people had started in Konstantinivka, and if they get back to it, they achieve a very significant political milestone. The Russians are not really keen on attacking in the open countryside, in the open potato fields. There is no cover there. Those were good for tank assaults in the World War II era, but with the drones now, you cannot afford to fight there. So the Russians would prefer to fight where there are built-up areas, there are towns and cities where their soldiers can hide. No major tank attacks are possible. The attacking is being done by the infantry, by the stormtroopers, based on motorcycles, all-terrain motorcycles, all-terrain vehicles, with which they try and take advantage of tree lines, vegetation cover to escape from the drones and go bit by bit by bit. They are not now fighting in the town street by street as they were earlier in Avdiivka and the other places. They are trying to bypass. And in bypassing, you give that Hobson's choice to the Ukrainians, either fight and die or be cut off, right? Or try and escape to fight another day. What we find is that the Ukrainians are tiring. They are running short of manpower. Every month, Russia is suffering about 4,200 killed and about 8,000 wounded. But the Russians are recruiting 50 to 60,000 new recruits every month. That means every month there is a gain. There is a gain in terms of manpower, right? Ukraine can only recruit about 20 to 30,000. So in this grinding war of attrition, Ukraine is slowing down. We find that increasingly Ukrainian troops are not prepared to fight and die, not prepared to slug it out as they were doing earlier. They are on the retreat. We will see that if the attack had been towards Kyiv, then the fight and die, stand where you are kind of a mindset, morale thing would come into play. But as long as the fighting is in Donetsk, Lugansk and the outlying provinces, they are not that. We find the keenness to fight and die, that morale is slipping, definitely slipping. Russia is winning the ground war, not in any spectacular way, but in a slow grinding war of attrition. Kilometer by kilometer they are advancing. Sometimes they advance up to 9 kilometers in a month, sometimes more. But they are slow, steady grind. The Russians are trying to wear down Ukraine, inflict so much losses that it is not in a state to continue the fight any further. So in the summer season, where do I see the Russian offensives going in? Into Petrovsk, where they have 30,000 troops and they have formed a pocket around that. They're going to attack it from the north salient, try and cut off this salient, give that Hobson's choice, withdraw or perish and die, right? And generally the Ukrainians are choosing the option to withdraw rather than be cut off. The other salient is the Kramatorsk salient, where there are 50,000 Ukrainian troops, and the Russians are again trying to, they've got it in a pocket from the north and the other directions. They're trying to attack, which will lead to a very major battle. And finally, if the Russians get that, they can break out towards Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Those are the final two cities left in the Donetsk province, now with the part which is with Ukraine. Having completed that, Russia I think, would feel that it has completed the basic objectives of trying to take back the provinces of Donetsk, Luhansk, trying to get a safe corridor, land corridor to Crimea. They have achieved that, and with that they can, call off their offensive with a kind of a satisfaction that they have achieved all their stated objectives, right? And they have also inflicted heavy attrition and casualties onto Ukraine. Had it not been for American and NATO support, Ukraine would have been finished 3 times over. That means all its weapons and equipment have been destroyed 3 times over, and each time it has been rebuilt by the Americans and the NATO countries to continue the fight against Russia. But how long can this fight continue? How long can Ukraine keep taking manpower losses is the key question. At a point in time, morale could suddenly give way. We had seen that happen in World War II. Slow, grinding, painful advances, very heavy losses. But suddenly the German morale collapsed, and that was the end of it. So the Russians have brought in 110,000 troops for their summer offensive. What about Donald Trump? As I mentioned, Donald Trump had said 24 hours of my taking over and there will be a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, the conflict has only intensified. Ukraine is losing the ground war, but it is trying to make propaganda hits like the Operation Spider Web, in which, it smuggled in drones into Russia, attacked their bomber fleet lying in the open because of the SALT agreement, by which Russian and American bombers have to be kept in the open so that they can be picked up by the enemy satellites and both sides can be reassured that nobody is trying a surprise hit. They took advantage of this and they claimed to have destroyed 40 bombers. The Russians are saying 10, but those are strategic bombers, part of the Russian nuclear deterrent, nuclear triad. So quite obviously, if you hit like that, the Russians will retaliate. And when the Russians retaliate, Donald Trump is saying, I am getting mad at the Russians. I am very, very disappointed with Putin. He is just not prepared to end the war. And now, what has Donald Trump said? He said the following. He said, I am giving 50 days to Russia to stop this war.
We are very unhappy, I am, with Russia, but we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means.
50 days means that should be adequate for Russia to finish the summer offensive in the Donetsk and reach, achieve the objectives it had set out to do, right? And in the bargain impose adequate attrition on Ukraine to force it to the table for talks. Because Ukraine now, because of American encouragement, because of not so much American but more European encouragement, it is prepared to fight on forever and ever and ever. That is what it says. But the simple fact is that Zelenskyy at some stage will have to decide how many Ukrainians can he sacrifice. Like I said, they now lack the manpower base. 8.5 million Ukrainians have fled Ukraine and gone to other countries in Europe. About 1 to 2 million have died, right? And there are about 2 to 300,000 who've been surrendering, who've been deserting the battlefield. So how long can the morale last is the key question. The Russians, that is why, are bombing the cities. When they bomb the cities like Kyiv and the other main Lviv, etc., they force Ukraine to divert air support, air defense weapons from the field armies, fighting armies, to defend the cities and towns, which opens the way for the Russian attack via the air. The Russian Kamov helicopters, the Russian Su-30s, the Russian Su-27s, they can all then, Su-24s, frog foot, they can all then play a part in the ground fighting, right? That is the Russian strategy, to counter which America has said that Donald Trump is giving 50 days to the Russians. Beyond that, 100% tariffs, 100% tariffs on all who buy Russian commodities like oil and other products. That means 100% tariffs on India and China, etc. He's also said that he will be giving defensive weapons to Ukraine. The Pentagon will sell them to Europe, and the European countries will pass them on to Ukraine. Primarily, they are looking for Patriots, surface-to-air missile systems to defend their cities, which are under heavy attack. 700 drones in a day. That has been the ferocity of Russian air attacks, coupled with 40 to 50 missiles. All sorts of surface-to-surface missiles, etc. and air-launched cruise missiles. Will America also provide, offensive systems like the ATACMS, like the HIMARS, like the joint systems, the American equivalent of the Storm Shadow missiles, cruise missiles. So maybe those could also be sold to Europe to sell onwards to Ukraine. That is what Donald Trump has said. We'll have to wait and see how it goes. I think Donald Trump has been reasonable in giving 50 days to Russia, in the hope that they would have achieved what they want to achieve, their basics, and then would be ready, more amenable to a ceasefire. Thank you.